Good evening. I hope you can all hear me. My name is Jonathan Corney. I'm a professor at Strathclyde University. For this evening, it's my pleasure to host this IMechE webinar. Let's talk about mentoring, which is going to explore what mentoring can do for members, both for the mentor and the mentee. So this is one of many online events that the institution runs. And today, I think most of the attendees come from Scotland. So I would recommend you check out the IMechE near to you websites to see our local events. Next one in Edinburgh is a week on Tuesday with a talk about the recycled dockyards digitization. For this evening, we've got 3 speakers, all of whom I know are excellent presenters, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what they've got to say. We've got Sandra Mulligan, who's the IMechE Business Development Manager for Scotland, and 2 people who are going to talk about mentoring at the sharp end, so to speak, in industry. So we've got Graham Robertson, who's Principal Engineer at Technip FMC, and Kirsty Kapusak, who's Senior Conformance Engineer at a subsidiary of Network Rail, Network Certification Body. So before we get started, I think only one housekeeping thing is that we'll save the questions for the end. I hope we can have some good discussion. Feel free to either save your question and offer it. We'll unmute you at the end so that you can speak, but if you want to put it into the chat, that would be okay too. But if you are putting it into the chat, please send it to all the participants. Otherwise, it might only go to me, the host. So when you're putting it into the chat, select all from the drop-down menu. Okay, so I think that's all the important things said, and I will invite Sandra to start.
Great. Thank you very much, Jonathan. And thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. I'm just going to do a very brief introduction in terms of what we mean by mentoring from an IMechE perspective. So what we'll be going through over the next hour or so is a brief overview of IMechE mentoring from an IMechE perspective, the responsibilities that you have as an IMechE mentor, and huge thanks to Jonathan and Kirsty for joining us this evening, and they'll be sharing their insights from many years of experience as mentors with us, which is fantastic. So thank you both very much for joining us this evening. We'll be going through the qualities of a good mentor, the skills that are required in order to mentor developing engineers on either MPDS or the supported registration scheme. And we'll have some time at the end to deal with questions as well. So please do post the questions that you may have in the chat box. Don't worry if we don't get a chance to deal with your question this evening, or if it's a particularly detailed query. Just get in touch after this evening and we'll be delighted to provide additional advice, guidance or support for you. Or if you want a copy of the slides that we're using this evening, just drop me an email. You can see my email address is on the screen at the moment. So if you wouldn't mind making a note of that, and just ping me an email when you get a chance and we can share the slides with you after this evening. My colleagues and I in the business development team are normally out and about on visits to industry and academia. But unfortunately, due to the current restrictions, we haven't been able to do that for some months now. So we have curated all our events, and we're doing many, many online events. And we've details of those events on the webinar hub, and our particular events, so the membership surgeries that we organise, etc., are detailed on the webinar hub under workshops. So again, if you need additional support or advice, please do have a look there, because there's lots of good events. So what do we mean by mentoring? Well, very briefly, it is a process, and the mentor is there really to support and encourage the longer term development of the mentee or developing engineer. And the origin of the word mentor goes right back to very, very long time ago, the time of the Trojan Wars, when Odysseus was going off to fight in the Trojan Wars and had to leave his household and his son in the care of somebody, and he decided to leave the care of his household and his son in the care of his friend, his wise and trusted friend, mentor. So that is where the origin of the word came from originally, for those of you who may not be familiar with that origin, which I think is really what mentoring is ultimately all about. The mentor is really a guide or advisor, normally somebody who's more senior and can help somebody who's organizationally more junior. It could be in the same organization, it could be in a different organization. You know, there's lots of initiatives, for example, to get people mentoring school children nowadays, which is something quite new and I think really interesting, really innovative and really positive. So it may be in a work environment, it may be outside of a work environment, but somebody who's normally more junior to help them, advise them, guide them, etc. And the mentor's experience and credibility are really vital. It's, if you like, somebody who's been there, seen it and done it, as it were. And if it's something they haven't done, then they'll know somebody who has. So that's a very brief overview of mentoring in a sort of its broadest, widest sense. I think, however, because this is an IMechE event, it would be useful to share the IMechE's definition of mentoring with you this evening, because it is a little bit different in that it's quite specific. So the IMechE definition of mentoring is that it is the wise counselling of a developing engineer in a protected relationship which focuses on a developing engineer's personal development from dependence and inexperience when somebody joins an organisation, perhaps after graduating from university or perhaps after completing an apprenticeship and they're quite inexperienced, through to maturity and independent professionalism. So the mentor is guiding the developing engineer on the pathway towards successfully gaining their professional registration, be that chartered engineer status, incorporated engineer status, or engineering technician registration. And I think one of the things that's quite unique to the responsibilities of an IMechE mentor is that as an IMechE mentor, there will be times when you need to assess the work that a developing engineer is doing. You'll be assessing the work that the developing engineer is doing against UK spec. Now, in a lot of other mentoring scenarios, the mentor is not assessing the work that the mentee is doing. So I think that's an important difference to highlight this evening. There's of course other things that you need to do as an IMechE mentor. You need to lead the relationship, you need to interpret the IMechE requirements and the company requirements and the individual's strengths and weaknesses and help them form a plan. There'll be times when you need to coach them. There may be times when you need to act as a counsellor, and by that I mean a career guidance counsellor in particular. There's also a number of qualities that you need, and I've just included some of those qualities in a word cloud that you can see on the screen at the moment. I'm not going to talk about this too much because I know Kirsty and Graham are going to be sharing their insights on this topic with us very shortly. But if you want to be an IMechE mentor, be that for MPDS or the supported registration scheme, you do need to complete a mentor registration form, and you'll find those on the IMechE website. And that will then allow you to use Career Developer and access the records of the developing engineers that you are mentoring. Number of skills that you required in order to be a successful mentor. I would suggest this is just a very brief summary of those skills, but again, we'll be talking about them in a little bit more detail shortly. You need to have good knowledge and understanding of both the academic and the competence requirements. You need to understand the scoring system that will be used at the professional review interview. I think it can be useful to start off with the end in mind, and the end goal, if you like, is to help the developing engineers successfully gain their professional registration. So in order to successfully do that, you need to be familiar with the scoring system that's going to be used at the professional review interview. Also very useful to have a good understanding of the opportunities available within your workplace. You need to have good active listening skills, good communication skills. Also be skilled at providing feedback. You want to be able to provide feedback in a way that's constructive and helpful to the developing engineer. And there are lots of other skills too. These, I would suggest, are some of the main ones, but we'll be talking about more of the skills that are required shortly. I'd also just like to draw your attention to the webinar hub as well, because there are lots of resources that should be useful to you as a mentor or equally as a developing engineer. Just included a screen grab from the webinar hub, which you can see on the screen at the moment, and that's of course being added to all the time. I've also included a screen grab from our YouTube channel, because this is where, again, there are lots of webinars which should be very useful to you both as a mentor and as a developing engineer, because as you can see, there's a huge variety of different topics covered. So you can see on the screen at the moment, the topics that are covered just in that single screen grab include things like the importance of grammar and punctuation for engineers, talking about mental health, there's technical events, there's changing career strategies, there's helping you prepare for professional review interviews. So it's a really good resource which is being added to all the time and worth becoming familiar with if you're not already. Also on the LMS part of the website, that's the part of the website that's managed by our colleagues in training and development, there are mentor training modules. So if you're new to mentoring, doing those modules in your own time can be a good way to get a good understanding of what the IMechE mentor requirements are. So they're completely free of charge for you to access, and the module takes about an hour to complete. And there's some good examples of quarterly reports there and scoring of quarterly reports. So that's a useful tool to be aware of. There are, of course, training courses that you can attend, and my colleagues and I regularly deliver in-company sessions as well. So that's a very brief overview of the IMechE requirements and some of the resources that are available to you. I promised I'd be brief, so I have been very brief. I've gone through this quite quickly, but you can get a copy of the slides and obviously chat in more detail after this evening. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Kirsty, and Kirsty's going to share some of her insights as a mentor with us this evening. So thank you, and over to you, Kirsty.
Thank you, Sandra. So thanks for inviting me along this evening. Just to really give you an insight into my experience as a mentor. When Sandra asked me to do that, I kind of thought to myself, why is it I wanted to become a mentor? And I guess that's one of the first things I would encourage all you guys to think about. So why is it you want to be a mentor? And you'll all been through the process and you'll all have had a mentor, and what did that person, that individual teach you? And I guess my experiences has encouraged me to become a mentor because of the gentleman that mentored me. I started in the railway 20 years ago, and my mentor was a fairly senior track engineer at the time, a really nice gentleman who was wholly supportive of my career. So Bob did he was my original mentor, and he still mentors me now. I applied to become a fellow last year, and he was one of my sponsors. So that shows you the length of time that I've had that relationship. And that relationship was built on trust. It was built on mutual respect, and it was built on Bob giving me an opportunity to develop myself and to challenge myself. And I guess not everybody will have had that type of experience, but if you've not had that type of experience, what has it taught you? So if you've had, some people don't have the best mentor, they're maybe not that supportive, but what can you learn and take from that you could then bring to somebody else's career? So I guess it's important, or for me anyway, it's important to think, where did I come from? What did my mentor originally teach me? And then what can I offer to a mentee learning from that experience? So I think there's just a few bullets below that, Sandra, that kind of summarises that underneath my experience. As you can tell, I don't have control of the slides. So, yep, he supported me over the last 20 years. As I say, he sponsored me for CN Jan's Fellow, encouraged and challenged me, and always encouraged me to achieve my full potential. So when I was applying for jobs, I started working for him, but then I moved away from his part of the business, but I would still use him as a sounding board if I was thinking about changing roles. So that relationship has withstood 2 decades. So I think that's something to aspire to. And I guess as a mentor, I look back at what I learned from Bob and what Bob taught me, and hope that I can impart some of that onto the ladies and gentlemen that I now mentor. So if you just move on to the next slide, please, Sandra. So I guess I was just thinking generally about some tips. Obviously, there's loads of great information on all the resources that Sandra's already suggested. Doing the official training that the IMechE offers is really good. The people that run that have a great experience. They give you lots of examples of what to look for. And obviously you get lots of guidance from that. But from my personal experience, I think the main things that I always think about when I'm taking on a new mentee is, do I have the time to take on another mentee? So at the moment I've got 2 guys that I'm mentoring, and that's manageable for me with my role. So, you know, if you're thinking about it, you need to make sure that you can make the time for these developing engineers. You need to make that time sacrosanct. So you need to set that time aside, you know, diarise regular catch-ups. Make sure that you've got something in both your diaries so it's a focus for you both. So the responsibility is equally on you as it is them. I try and encourage them to use the facilities that are on, if they're doing the MPDS scheme, that are on the website. So there's the opportunity to upload a plan. So I think it's really good practice to get into the habit of creating a plan. So I always try and encourage them to create a plan for each quarter. When they're creating that plan, they're trying to think about the competencies that they're aiming to meet during that quarter. So it's really focusing them on what they're trying to achieve. If we have that plan, before we have our catch up, I can have had a look at it, and then we can have a chat about, you know, are there areas that we're concentrating on and missing other competencies. So I think it's good to use that tool. When you're moving on to sort of quarterly reports, it's also good to get the guys and girls to send you in advance just on Word. Sometimes the system can be a bit clunky online, so if you do it on Word, send it over. It can be quite a strange thing to start with, especially on MPDS when you're just out of university and you do maybe a round of a big organisation and you don't feel like you're actually doing. You're more doing business familiarisation, maybe some basic safety training, and sometimes the people that you're mentoring struggle to tie that into competencies. So it's good if they send you just like effectively maybe a brain dump to start with, and then you can get that into a format that you know will meet the requirements and actually looks more like a technical review of their own performance. One of the main things as well is, as an engineer, everybody wants to problem solve. You want to dive in both feet. I think when you're working with your mentee, it's really important to do good active listening. So some of the skills that Sandra's already mentioned, but I think you need to be listening to what the individual's telling you, never judging what they're telling you or lecturing them or problem solving on their behalf. You really need to be that sounding board. You need to be encouraging them to give you the information that you can digest. So again, just stepping back to the quarterlies, you want them to be telling you what it is that they've done in the last quarter, them to be explaining to you how they think that they've ticked the boxes for the competencies, what they've been delivering. And I guess you need to manage their expectations. So it's okay when you're just starting out on your journey, on your career, that your 1s and 2s in competencies, you're learning, you're developing. Over time, that will progress, and you will be able to see them move from somebody that needs quite a lot of support to somebody that has real autonomy and is delivering real goals and work. So I guess you need to explain that to them, set that out to start with. Also, it can be difficult, especially if it's a large organisation, to navigate around. If you're a very small fish in a very big pond, it can be difficult to see the wood for the trees. So you should be able to use your business knowledge, the contact portfolio that you've developed over your career, to actually get them to think about opportunities that might be out there for different short spells that they can go and learn. If there are competencies that they're struggling to achieve, is there a placement that you can help them to arrange that will help them to slot in and tick those competency boxes? And I think throughout the journey, you need to be thinking about preparing them for final interview. You know, you need to be making sure that you can see that progression, you can see that development. You're encouraging them to take on more responsibility. And if they're not ready, you need to be able to have those difficult conversations where you need to be saying, maybe we need to take some more time, we need another quarter, 2 quarters, just to make sure that you have then the level of responsibility, autonomy, to go into interview confidently, because I also act as a PRI interviewer, and there's nothing worse than sitting on the panel and having somebody in front of you that just maybe isn't quite ready, and you know they have the potential, and if they had waited just that short amount of time longer, that they would have had a better chance in front of the panel to really sell themselves. So I think that it's key just to make sure that you're managing expectations, you're challenging your mentee when you're going over your quarterlies. You know, when they say that they've designed and built the widget themselves, have they really? You know, so it's okay to challenge them, and it's okay to explain to them that you don't expect them right away to have the whole gambit of everything. You know, it's okay to build up that experience, because you tend to find that you can have one side or the other, somebody that doesn't feel they're doing anything, or somebody that's built his own motor car from scratch, you know. So I guess it's just managing those expectations. So they're just some general sort of tips that I try and apply to my mentees. Next slide, please, Sandra. So I guess I just put some thoughts on, and I think it's really important, especially at the moment. Obviously, everybody's working remotely. I've just gained a new mentee, and the first couple of sessions that we've had have obviously been similar to what we're doing now. So I think it's really key that you create a safe environment. So you need to make sure that the mentee feels that they can speak to you, that you know that it's a colleague to colleague conversation, and it's okay for them. They could be quite frustrated sometimes in a role, and you sit to the side of that. So you can be that sounding board, you can be that vent, but then you can have the overview to actually bring them back and focus on what it is they're trying to achieve. I think you need to be continually challenging them. You know, you need to make sure that they're fulfilling their full potential. So they're gaining experience as they start the journey, and then they're showing you that they're moving into maybe first position. They might use you as a sounding board to say, I'm applying for 2 or 3 jobs, what do you think? And then you're actually encouraging them to weigh up the pros and cons and explain to you what they think is best for them. So again, letting them lead themselves to the right answer, but given that wealth of experience, you can sort of give them some general guidance. And actually, it's really quite rewarding to see somebody come into your organisation and develop and flourish, and actually really give something and bring something new, and to see the next generation to develop. So I think that that's really good. And I think as well, perseverance is key. So sometimes you'll get a mentee that comes in gung-ho, and you're getting the quarterlies regularly, and everything that they're doing is what you're looking for, and then maybe they fall away. And I guess you as a mentor need to have enough in you to go back and say, you know, come on, we're getting through this journey together. They could have a life event, there could be something happening. You need to be in constant dialogue with them just to understand where they are in their career, and maybe a bit about their personal life, so that, you know, maybe they're getting married, you know, and they're needing a quarter off, and you need to take these things into cognizance, but you do need to persevere with them and make sure that actually they achieve that end goal. So those are my general thoughts on what I've sort of seen over the last sort of 10 years as an official mentor, and over the last sort of 15 as an unofficial mentor.
Sandra, did you say something? I thought your microphone was... No? Okay. We can't hear you, Sandra. So thank you, Kirsty. We'll move on to Graham, and then we'll take questions at the end. So you...
Good evening, everybody. Hopefully that my mic's working. Sure you'll let me know very quickly if it's not. Yeah, thumbs up from Jonathan. Good. So I'm Graham Robinson. I work for a company in Dunfermline, Scotland called TechniFMC. Curiously, because this is a session about mentoring, I don't actually mentor at the moment, but I am the scheme administrator for Dunfermline, for the TechniFMC's Dunfermline MPDS, which is it's quite a mature scheme. It started in 1993, so it's been going around for a while. It's very well supported by the organisation. It's within the site culture, effectively. We can't imagine not having an MPDS scheme. We actually just we were the first scheme. We just went through re-accreditation. We were the first scheme in Britain to be remote re-accredited, which that was quite interesting. Worked really well. Really actually quite positive about how the whole event went. But certainly, changing times, mentoring's probably more online. Scheme assessments are more online. Webinars are all online. So it's a new tomorrow with some new skills to learn. Our scheme, typically we have about 20, in the order of about 20 people on at any one time. So some years could be 4 or 5 graduates, some years might be 2. But over the years of the scheme, it probably runs about 20 to 30 people. So we have that number of mentors at any time within the scheme. So scheme administrator, I'm kind of overseeing the mentors, as it were, as well as, you can just scroll down a little bit further, Sandra, because our scheme is split into 2 parts. So the first 2 years is rotational, and it's providing a very broad development to the developing engineer and a good introduction to the business environment. And that's essentially the goal of it, is introduction to the business environment. So you've come out of uni, you're an engineer, well, a starting engineer, but you know very little about business. So let's teach you about business and how engineering happens in the real world rather than the world of academia. So we've got a combination of rotational placements and scheme thematic activities where the graduates work together on specific goals, specific projects for the scheme. So the scheme also is run at that stage by the graduates themselves with oversight from myself as the scheme administrator. Year 3, 4 probably becomes a little bit more like supported registration. So they stop reporting to me at that point and move into delivery teams. And at that point, it's the mentor relationship at that point is very important, because the developing engineer, hopefully we gave them the skills in the first 2 years to do this, but the developing engineer is then responsible for their own development within a normal work environment. And the mentor travels with them through that whole scheme time. So although in the first 2 years they get quite a lot of support from the scheme administrator, the second 2 years, years 3 and 4, is very much them and their mentor and their new line manager. It's driving them through. So it's quite a few, it's obviously as a scheme administrator and overlooking the whole scheme and seeing how different relationships work within it. There's a few things that I think are important, or I've seen are important from our mentoring community, which I've sort of divided up into technical, company and social skills. And there's bizarrely, or maybe it's not bizarrely, there seems to be a lot more social skills required to be a mentor than the other stuff. So yeah, technically you need to be very technical, or at least have good sound knowledge of mechanical engineering principles, so that you can understand. You might have gone a few years on into your career. You might be a manager now, and then a new design engineer goes on, and he's at the cutting edge of what your company does suddenly, and you need to be able to understand what he's talking about, as well as if maybe there's something they don't understand. In which case they might not understand it, and you need to help explain it to them what it is they're working on. So sound understanding of mechanical engineering, UK spec absolutely, because it's the centre of what you're aiming at, and also you're the role model. They're going to learn about professionalism from their mentor. So what you do, they see, and that's what they will aspire to become. So if you want to, you need to be that professional that they can copy. Now, you also need to have a very good understanding of your own company, product, services, processes, and structures. Because you say they've come out of uni, we've got quite a fast learning curve in our company. So we expect a lot of the graduates over the first 2 years, and definitely by year 3. So it's a very fast learning curve, and they are reliant to some extent on the mentors to help them through that. Which then means that mentors need to have a lot of quite good social skills to be effective. So I think a key one to me is curiosity. You have to, as a mentor, you actually have to want to learn from the design engineer. You're going to learn as much from them as they do from you. Empathy is a key one. You need to see from these things from their perspective. If you've been around the company for 15, 20 years or 10 years or whatever, then you need to be able to understand. There's also possibly a different generation. They've grown up with mobile phones, whereas I love to switch mine off. It's not something that's really me yet, but I need to understand the modern world from their perspective. I have to want them to succeed. That's a key one. You know, the whole point of this is their success, not your success. You've already got success. It's, you know, your job is to make them successful or help them be successful. So you have to be positive, even if they completely mess something up, you need to look for the success. What was the learning opportunity? What did you get out of that? Why would you do that differently next time? But be realistic. There's no point when you're scoring to mark somebody up. It doesn't do them any favours. Same point, marking them down doesn't do them any favours either. So, you know, realistic scoring. So that's where the UK spec understanding and the IMechE's measurement of that's important. And it's a long game. So you have to have commitment to it. If you just want to mentor this week, don't start. It's a long commitment, which means you have to have the time to do it properly. So quite often, if you're coming up towards your own career change, your own promotion, it might not be a time to take on a mentoring role. You've got to have that commitment and time to do it properly with your developing engineer. I think it's important to be aware of the fact everybody's got a different learning style. They're not you. They are themselves. They will write a sentence different than you would write it. Their grammar might be different than how you would write it. You know, don't correct stuff just because it's not how you would have done it. So I think you need to be, you know, inclusive to their style, but also be aware of, you know, your developing engineer, for example, might have dyslexia. You need to be aware of that and work with them on that as you're doing quarterly reports. So yeah, you do need a bit of empathy and a bit of inclusivity whilst you're mentoring. Next slide, Sandra. So yeah, our mentoring relationships last about 4 to 6 years. Good relationships, probably about 4 years, because you really are helping the engineer forwards. We have people on the scheme that just keep going down a little bit, Sandra. Getting ahead of the bullet points. Yeah, so some of our engineers end up on the scheme for a little bit longer than I would like, and that, to me, that it suggests the relationship possibly wasn't as good as perhaps it could have been. So yeah, just be aware that, you know, what is the state of the current relationship, and sometimes a developing engineer would actually get chartership possibly earlier if they had left them a current mentor at year 3. So if you get to it's a long game. I think if you get to the point that it isn't working, move on. Be realistic on that. You know, if your own career's moved to the point that you don't have the time, suggest that, you know, they may benefit from a change of mentor. Next point. And that's particularly important later on when your engineer's getting towards the higher competency scores. When I did used to mentor before I took on the scheme administrator, my sort of guiding rule for you know, that last point in time I'm about to apply was, if you need to ask me whether you're ready to apply, the answer's no. So you should have that competence, but there's a gap. You know, when you're beginning of year 1, the answer's no. You then, you know, in the middle there's a gap as well. Well, what are my gaps? You know, where am I good? Where am I still weak? What should I be focusing on? They really need the mentor's help at that point. And then eventually I'll get over that, and hopefully they're confident. I'm ready to apply. I know I'm ready to apply. So it's very important that the relationship is that safe place, because you are discussing their actual performance. You're discussing their actual achievements, and you're identifying their actual developmental needs and their actual concerns. So yeah, that must be a safe place, otherwise it's not going to work. They can't be in that relationship thinking my mentor's going to discuss my performance with my line manager, or my mentor's going to discuss my performance with somebody else. It's a, you know, it's a safe relationship. You can have an open and real discussion with, supportive discussion with each other. Next slide. Which brings on equality and respect. The relationship has to be based on equality and respect. So the manager is not the boss. So, you know, sometimes you might be a manager, you might be a senior manager, and you take on mentoring. When you're in that mentoring relationship, you are not the boss. You should never come at it from a position of power. It's neither is it your role. We've seen this in some older mentors. I think it's probably less key now, but mentors used to try and give their mentees homework, or to get them to present their work back to them on a whiteboarding, and that's kind of a power trip. In my head, it should be an open discussion. It's an equal discussion. Which means show me the evidence. What have you been working on? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, show me. Oh, tell me, why did you do that? There's just why, what, when, how type conversational. discussions leading to the developing engineer themselves concluding whether their work was any good or not. And that can be driven by actually being genuinely interested in what they've been doing. Next slide, Sandra. And the key point is that the developing engineer is responsible for their own development at all points. So the mentor should never tell the developing engineer what to do next or give them an answer. Ideally, you would only ask questions, but that gets kind of annoying and isn't really natural conversation. So we'd always advise just have that natural conversation with your developing engineer. But the goal overall is that the developing engineer has to solve their own problems, not that you'll get all their own technical thing they're working on. You can help with them. So that accessing your experience may help them to develop a better solution faster, but it ultimately has to be their solution. It's their achievement. You can't take that achievement away from them. They have to be responsible for getting it, and that's the development process that you're supporting. It has to be their journey, and hopefully your involvement in that journey means that they get there better and faster. Next slide, Sandra. And yeah, it has been an active relationship. We've got a few, over the years, I've seen a few mentors that basically make the developing engineer run after them all the time. It's like, you book the meeting, so if you phone me, I'll, to one hand, it's you taking, the developing engineer taking control, but it's got to be a two-way relationship, otherwise they ultimately get problems. And in the modern Microsoft Teams environment where you can just chat to each other, it's not really an excuse anymore for the mentor, even if they're a senior manager, being remote from the developing engineer. We can have that contact. And there definitely seems to be a generational thing, I think, now where newer people coming into organizations have grown up in this chat environment. They expect that constant. I expect to be able to talk to my manager or my mentor lots. So best advice I have, we've got a couple of our mentor relationships do manage this, and it is brilliant when they do it. So this is my best advice, but most of our mentor pairings don't manage it, but I keep pushing it forward as we've got some that do, and look how good they are. Keep the quarter in the quarter. Okay, so the IMechE gives you another quarter to complete your report afterwards, which is very generous. Keep the quarter in the quarter. So talk about what the developing engineer is doing right now. What are they working on today? And then you can talk about and review the evidence as it happens, rather than piling all up to the end of the quarter. Okay, so if you can keep on top of it, it's a very meaningful relationship as you get. So what are you doing today? Let's have a chat about it. Let's review your evidence today. And then you get to the end of the quarter, you know what they've done. You've had the chat about what they've done, so you can, especially if they've written their couple of sentences a week on their report as they've gone along, and then you get to the end of the quarter, you sign off the report. You don't have a backlog. You can start the next quarter clean, and then you discuss what they're doing in that quarter as they're doing it. So that's that's my advice for mentoring from the scheme administrator's point of view.
Thanks very much, Graham.
Okay, thank you, Graham.
Yeah, we needed a slide that said the end. I thought this one gave it away for me, but I guess we weren't aware of what my last slide looked like. Yes, Jonathan, I finished.
Okay, that's not your last slide. Okay, great. Okay, well, I've learned a lot already, but before I hog the questions, I can see there's some in the chat, and hopefully we'll get a few more. Brian Mahone has asked, how far should I go in reviewing an application form? Somehow it feels wrong to go too far in coaching and editing submissions. So, Graham and Kirsty, do you proofread people's applications? Or is it more active than proofreading? You're saying, let's do it.
Yeah, so our mentors and line managers are typically the sponsor and second sponsor. I always give people the option of also sending their application to me, which I like, just because I like to read what it's benchmarking our scheme against each other effectively. But generally, by the time I see them, I'm third in line of seeing it. So there's very few corrections at that point. And yeah. I would agree. If you're needing to make a lot of corrections at that time, it's suggesting they're not yet ready.
Okay.
I would agree. So I would always proofread just to get a feel. We would have how I would approach it is I would have a conversation with my mentee before they actually filled the form in, so that I understood, where they were going to take their evidence for each of the sections. They'd write that up. I would proofread it because I would expect it to look a certain way. But if I was having to edit it overly much, then that would make me feel that they weren't ready as well. So I think it's okay to do the proofread, and if there are some glaring errors, a few grammatical corrections, and maybe some evidence that you thought they were going to include that's actually key that you maybe suggest, considering putting that in, that's okay. But if it doesn't feel right, then I wouldn't suggest that it's appropriate to be submitting.
Yeah. So that's a light touch, unless of course they've actually forgotten something they've done, Okay. Question for Sandra, I think here, from Joanne Lewis, who's mentored in the past and wants to know how to find out if they're still registered as a mentor with the IMechE.
Okay, if you just get in touch with my colleagues, if you just send an email to mpds@imeche.org, they will be able to check that for you.
Okay.
So it may be that you've been taken off the registry. You might just need to complete a mentor registration form again. But my colleagues in MPDS should be able to check that for you.
Gotcha. So waiting hopefully for a few more questions, though. I'll ask one. Graham, I was intrigued. You listed some of the qualities that you thought a professional engineer needed, like curiosity, empathy, positivity. And, we've all encountered human beings with varying degrees of these qualities. What do you do when how do you encourage someone to be more empathetic? Do you just tell them? Or is it a case of just becoming aware that you need to think about this because it doesn't come naturally?
That's a tricky one. Within our mentor developing engineer pairings that develop, and when the graduates join the scheme, I'm involved in the recruitment. So I kind of have started to get a pretty good awareness of the graduates. Once they actually start in the company, they report to me anyway. So we don't allocate mentors probably for the first quarter quite often. It depends. This year was quite quick. Sometimes you're trying to understand the individual developing engineer. But at the same time, I'm also aware of the mentoring pool that we have available. We have quite a large mentoring pool of chartered engineers and incorporated engineers available. So we're certainly informal on those, developing those, on identifying those partnerships. And essentially describe it as going on a first date. So I will, once I know the developing engineer well enough and who's available in our mentoring pool, it's just get together, go have a chat. If it doesn't work out, both of you can reject it. Either of you can reject it, and then we'll suggest somebody else. So the developing engineers typically wouldn't pick somebody that they didn't think they could work with, which would then come into the empathy side. So it's not a problem I've really had to deal with.
Okay.
I think I've come across a couple of times where I've met people that it was very obvious from their skill set that mentoring was not something that they would naturally be good at, and it was a skill set they didn't particularly want to develop. But they wanted perhaps to do mentoring for CPD reasons. I would tend to try and suggest to them to think of other alternatives, because there's lots of other activities that you can pursue in terms of CPD.
Okay, so questions been flooding in actually. So William Morris was asking whether the mentee's expectation should be to be chartered at the end of the 4 years. Is that typical? So Graham mentioned 4 to 6 years. Kirsty, I don't know, what's your expectation?
The MPDS scheme that Network Rail offers, which is where I've generally mentored, the aim is 4 years. So they do sort of 18 months of rotation and then 2.5 years in an actual role, sort of delivering. So it is achievable, and most of the guys that I've mentored, that's been the case. I think you need to make sure that when they move into a role, that role has the breadth of different experience that they can sort of develop enough and have enough autonomy within the role to make sure that they are actually delivering.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha.
I normally suggest to people that it can be done in 4 years, but it's not automatic. It really depends on you as an individual. It depends on the opportunities that are available to you. It depends on your work ethic. It's a whole variety of different factors. So it is achievable, but it's not automatic that if you've been working for 4 years, you meet the requirements for CEng or 3 years for IMechE. So a lot of it is down to the individual.
Yeah, we're currently targeting application within year 5 is how we describe it, but at that age of life, that stage of life, some people get married, some people have kids. That can, other things become important. So once you get towards that end of the scheme and the actual application, it's I think there's different factors come into play, and it becomes a much more personal plan. What we have found, though, or we do see from our scheme, if people get into year 6, they're actually less likely to complete. Mm-hmm. Because life is more likely to get in the way. So you end up, there's a sort of sweet spot that seems to be a good spot to aim for, and then after that, if people are drifting into year 6, year 7, year 8, year 9, you definitely breach the end of MPDS. And some of our we have a very good success rate, but some of our non-successes just never get there.
Oh, I suppose it's about managing expectations. If you're told from the start that it's going to take 4, 5, 6 years, and then you won't be surprised. If you started with the impression it's going to be 2 or 3, then obviously that's a different sort of emotion. So Ian Atkins has asked, so thanks for the presentations. What do you get out of it as mentors? What's in it for you?
You want me to go first? So
yeah, I'm going to absolutely let you go first, Kirsty.
Graham's racking his brains.
I actually really enjoy it. I feel that it allows me to continue to learn, because I have moved away from the engineering that I did when I started with the railway, but through the guys that I've mentored, I get to sort of get to hear about new technologies and the work that they're delivering. I was really lucky to have a really good mentor, and I would like to give that back. In all honesty, I was so well supported throughout my career by my mentor that it put me in good stead, and I just feel like everybody should have that opportunity. So I like to try and think that I'm giving something back to both the younger generation and the institution.
And Graham, what's your...
My biggest thing, as a scheme administrator, my biggest thing is pride. I think I love it when it's the best job within the opportunities that I've had within Technip FMC. This is the best one, running the grad scheme.
Wow, that's a quote. I can see Sandra is writing that down.
I absolutely love having the grad scheme. I do other stuff as well, obviously, but as part of my portfolio of work, it's fantastic. Just being really involved in giving the guys a structure for a much better career start than looking back at my own career. I look back at all the things I did wrong in those few years. I could have got a better start. Yeah, so it's a lot of that. But yeah, just watching the graduates go from a new start in a company to achieving great things within even a very short, even the first 2 years, the first 4 years, the first 6 years, just watching that, being part of that development and feeling the pride of them doing it.
That's a great endorsement. So John Harmon has said, how often do you meet your mentees. And I would add, how long do your meetings take place? Are you talking an hour or hour and a half or the morning? What's the frequency and length, Kirsty?
So definitely at least once a quarter, and usually maybe an hour to an hour and a half. But as I said in the presentation, I like to have something in advance so that if they're maybe working on a project that I'm unaware of, I can go and get a bit of an understanding before I walk in so that I'm not walking in blind. But you need to do definitely quarterly at least, because then you're managing that relationship and you're building up that trust. If you're not meeting regularly and speaking in between, you want them to feel like they can pick up the phone and ask you a question, just drop you a note, ask your opinion. You want that to be developed, so you need to be making the time, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And Graham, you said keep the quarter in the quarter, but how long?
Our recommendation to the mentors is meet with your developing engineer at least once a month for an hour.
Okay, an hour, right?
Roughly. I mean, we don't prescribe, but we do also recognise every relationship's unique.
Okay.
So that's the sort of the ones that I would consider to be working the best appear to be meeting that sort of frequency, and then using Teams chat. Just between that, or even just when we were on site, it was corridor chats and coffee room chats, that kind of stuff. But sort of low-level constant involvement or constant communication, and then a decent time once a month.
Okay.
So many different methods of communication available to all of us now. As a mentor, you need to be using those, and I think little and often is really the key to a successful relationship.
Got you. I think that's Daniel. I'm reading out people's names here, and I'm assuming that the name underneath the question is the person who's asked it. But it could be the other way around. These could be the following question. Anyway, that was Daniel Cunny. And here is John Harmon saying, do any of the presenters have experience of being a mentor within quite a new NPDS scheme, therefore laying the groundwork as well as mentoring? Any tips? Any thoughts? Or
we regularly run industry contact networking events, or rather we did. The last one we did was in Aberdeen. With COVID, we're looking at moving those online, and that's usually an opportunity for mentors, scheme administrators, stakeholders to get together and talk and share best practice, etc. So that could be an opportunity. There's also a scheme administrators forum as well, where scheme administrators can get together. So there's a number of different ways in which you can engage with other mentors and stakeholders who've gone through the process of setting up new schemes. But of course, talk to us as well. If you've got any specific queries, we'll be able to help you.
Gotcha. And I think this is another one for Sandra. Dave Smith is asking, how do you know if you've been set up as an IMechE mentor? I've completed a registration form and sent over my mentee's membership number, but I can't see any menu options on my IMechE account specifically for mentoring. How do I find out?
I think, again, you need to send an email to mpds@imeche.org just to make sure they've actually received your form and you have been set up on the system. If you go into your IMechE account and you can't see access to your account, that would intimate to me that you haven't been set up. Or it could be, the other glitch could be that you've been set up as a mentor, but your developing engineer hasn't completed their NPDS or SRS registration form. So my colleagues in NPDS will be the first port of call, and they should be able to help you. Obviously, at the moment, with everybody working remotely, it is taking us a little bit longer to work through queries, so please do bear with us.
Okay, and Scott Houston is asking, I think this is probably another one for Sandra, aware of the training modules on the website, but is there any actual formal training requirement in order to become a mentor for the first time?
No, there isn't any formal training requirement in place. The main thing that we look for is your willingness to be a mentor, because somebody could, for example, have all the skills and not be willing to do it. Equally, somebody might not have all the skills, but is willing to work with them and to develop those skills. So main requirement is that you're willing to do it. If you do those mentor training modules online, that meets the mandatory requirements. There's obviously other training that you can undertake. There's lots of ways in which you can undertake additional training. There's so many webinars that you can access, there's books you can read, etc. And we also do a sort of 2-hour session which goes over the basics with you, and we often help set up mentor forums within organizations, because often we find that mentors don't often get together with other mentors to share their experience and best practice, so that can be helpful as well. So do get in touch and we can help you. My colleagues in L&D run courses as well, so there's the paid for courses, there's the free stuff, and there's all the other resources that are available online as well.
Gotcha. And another one, someone asking, how can you find a mentee if they're not working in a company which employs graduates, but they want to do some mentoring? Does the institution run any sort of dating service or matching service, I suppose?
Yes, we've got the independent mentor service, which we kind of run informally. So the best thing to do, again, is just get in touch with your details and we can add you to that database. So we sort of do it informally, that we match up mentors with developing engineers as and when the requests come in.
Okay, and now back to our 2 panelists. Here somebody's said, James Patterson has asked, how do you manage the situation where you've had a mentee who thought they were ready for PRI before you did? Yeah, and I remember one of the skills Graham mentioned was realism, of being realistic. So have you ever had that situation, and what did you do? Graham first and then Kirsty.
I think there's a sort of mentor-specific question. I think in our scheme, a lot of the time it's the opposite way around. So I've had a couple of interventions over the last few years where, and it's particularly with competency block B, where somebody's in a more specialist role, and the mentor's actually thinking they've not got enough design experience. And actually, they've got lots of other experience that comes into competency blocks B. So I think it's important that the mentors do understand the competencies properly, so that it could go either way. If we had a developing engineer that wasn't sure, we would probably put them through a practice run. So we actually have PRIs on our site, and one of the things we do as part of getting people prepared for going into interview, is we actually recommend they have a practice run with our PRIs. So if somebody was absolutely unready, they can play, have a go. They'll find out pretty quick whether they are or not.
So you can demonstrate it to them. And Kirsty, what would you do?
I've fortunately not been in that position, but I'd like to think that the conversations that we'd be having, I wouldn't actually end up in that position. I've never say never, right? But I think that's why it's so key that you're managing the conversations all the time. You're continuously looking at the competencies and how they are developing so that they understand themselves. I mean, I'm sure within the website there's a tool that actually shows you where you are. There's like a matrix for the competencies and which levels you're sitting at. And I try to, like when we do the annual review, look at that to see so that they understand themselves across the board where they are. I always do like a mock interview because I do sit on the panel. I'll just do a kind of interview myself. I don't have a panel that I can create, but I would always do that in advance. And I think that's good practice because it lets them understand the type of questions that they might be asked. Obviously, it's a peer-to-peer conversation, so it should feel natural, but there are always questions that you're going to ask because you're always going to be interested in the applicant. So I think that's a really good practice to do.
Okay. And I think one for probably a question without an exact answer. So David Lucas asked, how many retired members take up mentoring? I guess that's Sandra would be able to hazard a guess, perhaps.
We get lots of people who are mentoring developing engineers within an organization. They retire and they choose to continue mentoring, and equally get people who say, I've been keen on mentoring, I just didn't have the time, but now that I've retired, I do have the time, so they want to do it as a CPD activity. And I know, for example, recently Scottish Engineering, which is the Engineering Employers Federation in Scotland, started a mentoring scheme as well, but that's quite an informal mentoring scheme with quite different sort of aims and objectives. So if mentoring is something you wish to do, I think you'll find no shortage of mentees, either through IMechE or other organisations. And of course, it counts as a CPD activity.
Okay. And the last thing on the chat is a statement, not a question. It says the attendees' names who've submitted the question is before the question, not after. So if I read out your name with someone else's question, then you can just indulge me. There must be a communication skill I need to work on. So I think that brings us neatly to time. It's 7:30. If you have questions that you think of afterwards, so you didn't have a chance, we can see Sandra's email here on the screen. So I'm sure she'll be delighted to get your questions and follow up with you later. So I think it just remains for me to thank our speakers. I think at the beginning, Sandra mentioned that mentoring involved wise counsel and good communication. And I think we've seen both of those things this evening from our three panelists. And certainly I've got a couple of things that I'm going to go off and look up. Not least the discovery that the IMechE had a YouTube video about grammar and punctuation, which I will be looking at later this evening to find out about apostrophes. Okay, so thanks very much. Excellent evening.
And I'd just like to say huge thanks to Kirsty and to Graham for joining this evening, giving up their time to join us. That's really appreciated, and thank you very, very much. And to you as well, Jonathan. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for asking us.
Right.